Etheris was a world of extremes, where ancient magic intertwined with futuristic technology. At first glance, everything seemed balanced, like a fragile crystal that could shatter at any moment. Ronan, a mercenary with dark hair and eyes heavy with secrets, walked the dark streets of the floating city of Lurn. Each step echoed in his chest, a reminder of the war he was trying to erase from his mind. But the echoes of lost shadows wouldn't quiet down, and his past called to him with an irresistible force. When he got a mission from Celine Veros, an arcane engineer with a fierce glint in her eyes, he knew something big was coming. Something that couldn't be avoided. Celine, a woman who looked young but carried the weight of an ancient burden, studied the old runes at her makeshift desk. The relic, it's the key to everything, Ronan. We're not just after gold here. If we fail, all balance will be destroyed, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Ronan looked at her, trying to understand what she meant. He knew no matter how much he tried to ignore it, a dark force was starting to grow. Something ancient, something he could feel in his own skin, deep within his soul. But like a man scarred by war, he remained stoic as always. As they walked through the stone corridors of the city, the sky above began to warp. The void was expanding. Rumors of corruption eating away at the edges of the world began to manifest right before their eyes. Magical rifts started tearing through the fabric of space, releasing a cold wind that seemed to whisper secrets from another age. That's when Kiernan showed up, a former soldier with a lost look in his eyes, bringing a secret that could be the key to either salvation or the damnation of them all. He approached silently, but his presence was felt, like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. You're heading straight into the worst place possible, Kiernan warned, his voice deep and dragging. The relic Celine's after. It won't just save the world. Could destroy it too. Ronan stared at him, his war instincts kicking in at the threat in the ex-soldier's words. He knew their mission was more dangerous than anyone had imagined, but what he didn't know was that his own destiny was tied to the forces beginning to awaken. Then let's go, Ronan said, his voice as hard as steel. We can't turn back now. As the trio made their way through the streets, the shadows around them began to stir. The ancient evil that had slept in Etheris was waking up. And with it, the corruption of the lands. Celine kept working on the relic, her trembling fingers tracing the runes, trying to uncover what had long been forgotten. Ronan felt something in his soul, a connection to everything that was happening. But he didn't want to admit it. With every step closer to the truth, the fear in his chest grew. Kiernan, who had always preferred solitude, seemed more distant than ever. His eyes were fixed on something invisible, something only he could see. I've seen this before, he murmured. I was here and this is going to destroy us all. But Celine couldn't wait. She had already realized that the relic alone wouldn't be enough. Ronan, you have to trust me. The last piece, it's in you. Your blood carries the power that needs to be awakened, she said, with an urgency that seemed to transcend space and time. Ronan looked at her, and something in his chest tightened. He never wanted that power. He never wanted to be the key to an uncertain future. We're just getting started, Ronan, Kiernan said as the magical rifts around them began to widen, swallowing the horizon. And the worst is yet to come. The wind blew harder, and the air seemed to carry something ancient, something buried long ago. The trio, with their fates intertwined, moved away from their fears but got closer to something much more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. And as the shadows kept moving, Etheris' fate was about to be changed forever. But what Ronan didn't know was that he was getting closer to something much bigger than he could control. The rift in the sky wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a visible scar on the very fabric of the universe. It pulsed with waves of energy that seemed to affect the air around them, making the atmosphere thick and oppressive. Ronan watched the growing opening as if it were calling to him, like a black hole pulling everything in its path. The pain in his chest increased, but he couldn't pull his eyes away from the torn sky. The feeling of being watched, of being monitored by something much bigger than him, was overwhelming. The void, a primal and insatiable power, was coming with the force of an avalanche. Beside him, Celine, with a tense expression, had her hands on the relic they had found in the ruins. The piece was an ancient work of art, with details that defied any logical explanation. It was made of metal, but a material that seemed iridescent, changing color with the light. She could feel the weight of responsibility in her hands. With every movement, the relic emitted a low, constant sound, almost like a heartbeat. The symbols glowed faintly, and Celine knew, deep in her soul, that she was about to do something that might be irreversible. Kiernan, his eyes locked on the landscape in front of him, couldn't take his eyes off the cracks that were opening like hungry mouths. He was always ready for a fight, always primed for battle, but even he could feel the weight of the situation. He'd seen a lot in his life, but nothing like this. The creatures in the shadows, as the void spread, were becoming clearer, more tangible. They weren't just fleeting visions anymore, but real, monstrous, distorted presences, materializing as fluidly as the wind. They were like echoes of the abyss, representations of primordial evil threatening to swallow everything. "We have to finish this now," Celine said, her voice firmer than it had ever been. She looked at both of them with a serious expression, making her eyes seem even more piercing. The relic, with all its mysteries and secrets, wasn't just a piece of power. It was the key to stopping everything from being consumed by the void. But even she, with all her skill and determination, wasn't completely sure how to use that power. The ancient texts she had studied spoke of a prophecy, but the cost of unlocking whatever was trapped in the relic could be more than any of them could imagine. Ronan, staring at the cracks in the sky that were now taking on titanic proportions, could no longer ignore the growing feeling that something was deeply wrong. The void seemed to feed off the weaknesses and fears of the living, and he could feel its cold touch in every cell of his body. His hands were sweaty, and his eyes widened as he saw the creatures from the abyss beginning to form bodies made of dense shadows, like the darkness itself was taking shape. He clenched his fists, trying to push the fear away, but something inside him kept twisting. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was something more, something he couldn't quite place. Like his soul was somehow connected to the abyss that was opening up. It was like he had already been touched by the void, in a way that was invisible, yet deep. "Let's go, Ronan," Celine said, her voice now softer but urgent. She had already placed one of the pieces of the relic in its proper place, but there were others. 5 pieces, 5 steps until the full power was unleashed. And with every piece, the weight of their mission grew heavier. She was starting to understand what this task meant, what she would have to sacrifice to secure the future. The symbols on the relic began to glow more intensely as more pieces fit together. The power was growing, and with it, the possibility of something irreversible happening. Kiernan, who had always preferred the silence of battles to the chaos of words, finally spoke up. "This isn't gonna be easy. The void's not just gonna let us power up this relic. They'll hunt us down one by one until the whole world bows before them." Celine, still focused, didn't look up from the relic. "I know. But the alternative's worse." She knew what was at stake, knew that, no matter how incomprehensible the void was as a threat, they were the last line of defense. The relic wasn't just a weapon, it was a key to something bigger. Something the ancients had forgotten, a power of destruction and creation at the same time, that might be the only thing capable of keeping the void at bay. But what Celine didn't know was that the relic had its own intentions. As she completed the ritual, Ronan began to have flashes of a distant memory. A vision of an ancient being with eyes like bottomless pits, a figure that seemed both a memory and a threat. He didn't understand, but he knew this being was connected to everything that was happening. It was like he had seen this before, but in a past that wasn't his. Like he had been chosen for something he didn't yet fully grasp. "This is wrong," Ronan muttered, but Celine was so absorbed in the relic that she didn't hear him. Kiernan, however, noticed the change in his tone and looked at him with a dark expression. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ronan didn't answer immediately, but in his eyes, Kiernan saw the fear. It wasn't the fear of a creature or a battle. It was the fear of losing himself, of being consumed by something he couldn't control. The void was inside them, inside Ronan. It was too late to turn back. With one final movement, Celine placed the last piece of the relic in the center, and instantly, a wave of pure energy enveloped them. The cracks in the sky opened even wider, swallowing the stars and the sun, leaving only a shroud of darkness that seemed to devour everything. The creatures of the abyss began to close in, their eyes glowing in their spectral forms. There was no time left. They had triggered the key, but now the void was breaking free. "We're in the abyss now," Kiernan said, his voice sharp like the wind howling around them. But before they could do anything, the relic let off an explosion of light, and everything around them started to shake. Their fate was sealed. As the light from the relic radiated across the sky, a sense of absolute emptiness took over everything. What had once seemed like an explosion of power now felt like a sudden silence, a space where time and space had been warped. The creatures of the abyss were closer than ever, their shadows stretching over the land as if the sky itself was a prison. The void, with its threatening presence, it wasn't just that crack in the sky anymore. Now it ruled the air, the land, and even their thoughts. The rift had been completely opened, and what poured from it was chaotic, destructive energy that reverberated in every fiber of Ronan, Selene, and Kiernan's being. Ronan, still reeling from the explosion of light the relic had caused, felt the weight of what he had done. He knew that power could destroy not only the world but everything he cared about. But there was something else, an almost visceral connection to the void, something he couldn't fully grasp. He couldn't look at the relic without feeling something dark closing in. It was like, by using it, he had accidentally summoned an evil way worse than anything any of them had imagined. Beside him, Selene was kneeling, hand on her chest, trying to catch her breath, as if the energy the relic had unleashed was draining the life out of her. Her eyes were glazed over, locked on the horizon where huge shadowy creatures were starting to take shape. She'd done what needed to be done, but the cost felt way higher than any sacrifice she could have prepared for. The relic, now fully formed, seemed to have a life of its own. It wasn't just a tool anymore, it was an entity, something that was beginning to have its own power and will. And Selene knew that, by completing the ritual, she had also marked her own doom. Kiernan stood, immune to the visible effects of the energy, but he could feel the weight of the situation hanging over him like a sword. He'd always been ready for a fight, but this was a whole new level. The void was an endless threat, something that couldn't be beaten with sheer strength. He knew there was more at stake, something bigger than just a battle against dark creatures. This was a war against the very essence of existence. The void wanted to swallow everything, and they were the last ones standing in its way. "What are we gonna do now?" Kiernan asked, his voice low but full of attention that couldn't be ignored. He knew the world around them was starting to fall apart, like the laws of nature were being shattered. The rifts in the sky still pulsed, now even stronger, and the wind that was rising felt like it was slicing through their souls. Each breath they took seemed to be swallowed by that growing abyss. Selene, still with her head bowed, answered in a soft, almost empty tone. "We need to go to the heart of the void. The relic is the key, but now we need to use it to close the rift. Only then can we stop what's coming." Ronan looked up at the shadows beginning to stretch across the land, their twisted shapes reflecting a parallel reality. He could feel the darkness creeping into his mind, an unbearable weight, like something inside him was trying to wake up. It was as if the relic had infiltrated his thoughts, touching something he couldn't control. The connection to the void wasn't just a distant feeling anymore, it was now an internal presence, a force that made him question his own humanity. "We can't just walk there," Kiernan said, looking at the horizon where the void seemed to expand like a wave of destruction. "Something's moving inside of us. Don't you feel it? The void isn't just an external force. It's taking over the land, but it's also taking over us. It's changing us." Ronan looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and fear. "You think we're already lost?" Selene, who had stayed quiet up until now, slowly stood, her eyes now burning with fierce determination. "We're not lost yet," she said, her voice full of an unexpected firmness. "But if we're gonna fight the void, we need to understand what it is. It's not just a destructive force. It's something that corrupts, distorts reality and our own perceptions. Whatever's happening, it's happening inside us too. We're not just fighting the void outside of us, but the void that's already begun to grow inside us. With every second that passes, it spreads faster." Kiernan didn't respond, but his expression said it all. He knew she was right. They weren't just on a mission to save the world anymore. Now they were fighting something that was starting to swallow their very souls. The relic, which had seemed like the key to saving everything, now seemed like the source of the problem. If there was a solution, it was buried in some ancient wisdom they hadn't unlocked yet. But with every passing moment, more creatures were emerging from the rift, more shadows materialized, and the void kept spreading. Ronan, determined not to succumb to fear, looked at the two of them and made a silent promise. He wasn't going to let this end them. He didn't know how, but he was set on fighting until the end. But, looking at the relic in his hands, he started to feel maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the key to fixing this wasn't using it more, but destroying it before it was too late. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air itself was waiting for a decision. The future was hanging by a thread, and all that was left was the choice they would make next. As the reality around them started to break apart, the sound of the void creatures, which once felt distant, now filled the air, creating a palpable tension. The void wasn't some abstract threat anymore, it was right there, surrounding them in a way that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Time had stretched, and each second dragged on like existence itself was on the brink of an irreversible collapse. Ronan, Celine, and Kiernan knew that the choices they were about to make would be crucial, not just for their fate but for the future of the entire world. "We need to stop the void once and for all," Ronan said, his voice full of determination but tinged with uncertainty. He gripped the relic tightly, but his mind was cloudy. The connection to the void had grown stronger, and he felt as though the relic was slowly draining his very essence. Something was deeply wrong with what they had done, and now he wasn't sure if he could control the power they had unleashed. Celine, her eyes fixed on the shadows creeping across the horizon, thought about Kiernan's words. The void was expanding inside them, but how could they stop it? How could they keep their minds and bodies intact when everything around them and inside them was being distorted? The battle was no longer just against external forces, but against their own emotions, their very wills being manipulated by the void. Every step they took seemed closer to a trap, and the pressure only grew. "We need a plan," Kiernan said, interrupting Celine's thoughts. He was tense, scanning their surroundings as the first signs of the void's corruption began to show in the environment. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, and the wind, once light, was now thick with a heavy energy, pulling at every particle of their strength. "But we can't just rely on the relic anymore. It brought us this far, but now it might be our greatest enemy." Those words echoed in all of their minds. The relic was the key but also the threat. How could they destroy it without destroying the only thing that could seal the rift? How could they use its power without losing themselves in the process? The questions kept multiplying as the void advanced, and hopelessness seemed to grow. Celine looked at Ronan, her face marked by worry. "Ronan, can you still feel the connection to the void? Do you know what we need to do?" He looked back at her, his eyes tired and filled with a pain that couldn't be hidden. "Yeah," he replied, his voice tight with tension. "I feel something inside me. It's growing. But I don't know what it is, I don't know how to control it. The relic, it's not gonna help us, it's gonna destroy us." Kiernan, who had stepped back a little, watched the shadows beginning to swallow the landscape. They were spreading like a disease and there was no time left. The urgency was overwhelming. He knew they were about to lose everything, that every decision they made could be fatal. If the relic brought us this far, it might be the key to stopping it too. But we need to learn how to use it properly and not let it control us. And how do we do that? Celine asked, a frustrated sigh escaping her. She was exhausted, but she knew they couldn't stop. They were at a point of no return. There was no more room for hesitation. Ronan looked at the relic one more time, and this time, instead of just feeling its power, he tried to focus, trying to understand what it really represented. What exactly had he unleashed when he touched it? He knew there was something ancient about it, something humans weren't meant to meddle with, something that had been hidden for a reason. But what was it? And how could they use that power without the void taking over their souls? "I don't exactly know what to do," Ronan said, frustration clear on his face. "But we need to understand the origin of this relic. We need to go back to the ancient ruins, to the forgotten temples. The answer has to be there." Kiernan stepped forward, looking at the horizon where the void seemed to be moving faster now, as if it had gained new strength. "You're right. We need to go back to the ruins. But we also need to be careful. We don't know what else might be waiting for us there." And with that, the decision was made. They had one goal, to go back to the ruins and search for the answers they hoped would be there. But that didn't mean they were safe. Every step toward it could be a step toward their own destruction, and the only certainty they had was that the void was closing in fast. Celine paused, looking at the relic, which now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. "This relic? I don't trust it anymore. But we don't have a choice, do we?" Ronan nodded grimly, his eyes dark. "No, we don't have a choice. But before we get to the ruins, we need to understand one last thing: the void isn't just an external force. It's inside us too. And that's what scares us the most." Kiernan nodded, and the trio got ready to head towards the heart of the void. They had no idea what they'd find there, but they were determined to find a solution, no matter the cost. The void had started its rise, and there was no more time to waste. As they got closer to the ancient ruins, the feeling that the void was watching them grew stronger. The air was thick, loaded with palpable tension. With every step, the sound of their boots hitting the earth seemed muffled, like the world around them was distorting, becoming quieter and more oppressive. The relic, now in Ronan's hands, pulsed like it was alive, its glow flickering in a strange rhythm, almost like it was responding to the presence of the void. "What's going on with the air?" Celine asked, her voice low but filled with rising anxiety. She felt pressure in her chest, like she was being watched from every direction. "Something's not right here." Ronan glanced at the relic in his hands, his face marked by tension. He could feel its energy growing with every step, like it was consuming him with a force he couldn't control. "I know what you're feeling," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But we don't have a choice. The answer's here. The only way to stop the void is to understand what we really are, what this relic really means." Kiernan, leading the group, stopped and turned, his eyes scanning the ruins. The broken stones and crumbling structures seemed to watch them, as if guarding ancient, powerful secrets. "We're close. The void's almost on us. And if we don't know how to use the relic's power right, it's all gonna be for nothing. But we can't turn back now. The sacrifice it'll demand. I don't know if we're ready for it." Those words hung in the air, creating a sense of inevitability that surrounded them. The void was chasing them, but the worst part wasn't the external threat. It was the internal doubt. The doubt about themselves and what they were willing to sacrifice to restore balance. Ronan felt it painfully clear. The line between salvation and destruction was razor thin, and he didn't know if they'd be able to cross it. Suddenly, a wave of energy shook the ground beneath their feet. The void had finally reached the ruins. Shadows started to spread from cracks in the earth, like snakes slithering toward them. It was a terrifying sight, as if the whole place was being swallowed by darkness, the shadows absorbing every bit of light, distorting everything around them. They didn't have much time left. "Now," Ronan shouted, raising the relic. His voice echoed through the crumbling walls of the ruins. The light from the relic began to shine intensely, emitting a white glow that cut through the darkness like a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. But it wasn't pure light. There was something more to it, something dark and unsettling, as if the very essence of the relic was being challenged. Celine and Kiernan looked at Ronan, feeling the relic's power threatening to consume everything. The void was closing in, its shadows already wrapping around them. The sacrifice they feared was right in front of them. They had to figure out how to use the relic's power the right way before it was too late. "I can't do this alone," Ronan said, his voice trembling but full of urgency. "I need you guys. We need to do this together." Celine stepped forward, feeling the relic's energy in her hands, and Kiernan moved closer, placing his hand over Ronan's. The trio joined their forces, feeling the relic respond to their touch. The energy grew stronger, almost unbearable, like the air itself was about to explode in a cataclysmic collapse. But then, something unexpected happened. The void, which had seemed unbeatable, started to retreat, as if it was being repelled by their unity. The shadows that had been creeping like predators began to dissipate, dissolving into the ruins, one by one. But the victory wasn't so simple. The price of defeating the void was higher than they had imagined. As the darkness pulled back, the light from the relic began to fade. They could feel it, an overwhelming sense of loss, like something was being left behind, something that could never be regained. "I don't know if we're gonna survive this," Celine said, her voice now filled with inevitable sadness. "But we did what we had to do. We were the last but also the first to fight." Kiernan looked at the horizon, where the shadows were now fading, leaving behind a clear, illuminated sky. He knew that, although the void had been pushed back, the cost was steep. The relic hadn't destroyed them, but something inside them had changed forever. They had completed their mission, but the price of the sacrifice wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that would resonate throughout the world. "Maybe the world's been saved," Kiernan said, his voice low. "But us, we'll never be the same. And maybe that's our real sacrifice." Ronan looked at his two friends, feeling the weight of Kiernan's words. They'd done the impossible. They'd faced the void and come out on top. But the inner battle, the personal cost, was still ahead of them. The void hadn't just been defeated in the world outside, but deep down in their hearts and minds too. With one last glance at the ruins, Ronan, Celine, and Kiernan walked away, knowing that while they'd won, the real journey was just beginning. The world had been saved, but the echo of the void still lingered, and the real fight for balance was far from over. The Void had been temporarily beaten, but the three heroes knew the sacrifice they'd made wouldn't free them from the shadow of darkness. They'd saved the world, but now they had to fight to save themselves. With the Void finally retreating and the shadows fading, the sun shyly rose over the ruins, casting light on what remained of a world marked by struggle, sacrifice, and redemption. But as the sky began to clear, a weight still hung heavy on the hearts of Ronan, Selene, and Kiernan. They'd saved the world, but the real battle was a different one, a silent fight that echoed inside them. The relic, now powerless, fell gently into Ronan's hands, its energy finally drained. He stared at it, a sense of loss washing over him. Even though they'd restored balance, something inside them had been changed forever. The Void was defeated, but the scars of the battle were still there. They'd completed their mission, but the sacrifice, the things they'd left behind, would continue to haunt them. So what now? Selene asked, her question soft but carrying a depth that they all felt. What's left for us after all this? Kiernan, with his faraway look, knew the answer was more complicated than anyone could have imagined. They'd destroyed the evil, but they hadn't destroyed the pain it caused. They'd seen the price of power and sacrifice, and there was no turning back. What had once seemed like a battle to save the world now felt like a fight to rediscover their own souls. I guess what's left is to move forward, Ronan said, his voice now stronger, but carrying a wisdom that only experience could bring. The world's been saved, but that doesn't erase what we've been through. It doesn't erase what we lost. But maybe, just maybe, this gives us the chance to start over. To begin again. The trio, now silent, began walking together without words, but with a connection stronger than ever. What had been broken in each of them still needed mending, but now, together, they had the chance to rebuild what had been lost. The sacrifice hadn't been in vain. There might not have been a perfect ending, but there was hope that, in time, the darkness could be healed. In the distance, the horizon stretched out, vast and uncertain. But unlike before, it wasn't as scary anymore. It was an open field, ready to be explored, and maybe, just maybe, the start of a new era. The Void had been beaten, but the fight for redemption and balance, both inside them and in the world, was only just beginning. The last breath of darkness disappeared completely, leaving behind a new dawn. And so, as the world began to heal and peace slowly started to settle in, Ronan, Selene, and Kiernan moved forward, knowing the sacrifice would never be forgotten, but that hope, the true force that had brought them together, would continue to guide them, no matter the challenges still to come. And so, with a new journey ahead, the legacy of their actions would echo through generations, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the light of hope never truly fades. If you liked this story, don't forget to drop a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more stories like this. See you in the next video.